Hi, my name is Jim Arrabito, and I'm a Seventh-day Adventist layman. As a Seventh-day Adventist, I'm very, very interested in the fulfillment of prophecies in these last days. Especially am I aware of the place of Roman Catholicism in closing events. Well, I was on a street ministry in Berkeley about 10 years ago. I became acquainted with a Roman Catholic Jesuit priest from the University of San Francisco. I asked him in one of our conversations, "Have you read The Great Controversy?" And he explained to me that The Great Controversy has a lot of truth in it. In fact, he told me that the Roman Catholic Church will rule the world again. For a while, I was in a state of shock. You know, it just happens to be that although we're Seventh-day Adventists, many times we don't see in reality the very things that we supposedly believe. It hit me very hard, and I began about 10 years ago collecting books on Roman Catholicism and world politics. You know, we as Adventists expect somehow to see all these events take place out in the open. But you know, I found that that is not what Revelation 17 tells us. Revelation 17, verse 3 says this, "So he carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast." Well, a scarlet-colored beast is all the political powers that are going to pull together to destroy the commandments of God. The woman riding on that beast is Roman Catholicism and fundamental Christianity. John describes these things as taking place in the wilderness. Now, in reading Revelation chapter 12, we know that when the primitive church fled persecution, she went into the wilderness. And in Great Controversy, page 55, Ellen White tells us that the wilderness is a symbol that represents obscurity and seclusion. This means that at the end of time, Roman Catholicism is working in secret with the rulers of this world in an effort to control the world, to take it over. And I believe that time is right upon us. You know, I plan to put together a documentary film called The Missing Dimensions in World Affairs. And for that film, I had gathered together interviews with people who had had either personal experiences with infiltration of Jesuits or Catholic priests, or in one instance, an interview with an ex-Jesuit priest by the name of Alberto Rivera, and another, a secret agent for the federal government working for the Pentagon during the Second World War, and his wife was the chief stenographer of the Pentagon. All the funds that went over to Europe for the troops passed first through the Vatican. This man had had personal working relationships with Roman Catholic priests, and listen to him, he knows what he's talking about. I had to stop my plans to do this documentary and decide to just get these things before you right now. The Jesuit priests have been infiltrating every institution, and they're ready now for a takeover. I want you to pay close attention to this first person that we're going to interview. He's an ex-Jesuit priest, and he tells you about the infiltration by the Jesuits.
Especially I work in dealing with the infiltration of churches and religious institutions as well as government. That cover a tremendous number of institutions.
And the purpose of that infiltration was what for?
Well, the purpose is what the Roman Catholic system has all the time as her own purpose, is to infiltrate, to penetrate all the areas of life where the Roman Catholic can have control and access for the coming world government. What that means is, in preparation for that world government, the Roman Catholic institution, especially since the establishment of the Jesuit order in 1541, throughout all these 500 years, they've been in preparation, in and through infiltration and penetration of every level of society in order to take over the world politically and religiously. There are two doctrines that define very well these dangerous goal of the Roman Catholic institution. Two doctrines define this very well. One is called the doctrine of the apostolic succession, and that is dealing with the papacy. And the other is the doctrine, the temporal power, and that is dealing with world government. Of course, both, because you can see that even the Pope and his own individual office, he meet those requirements. He is not only the head of his church, as he called himself, John Paul II, the present Pope. He said he is the pastor of his church. He is not only that, but he is the head of his state, of his country. But that means he is the head of a political state. Both combinations are in one office. They are, in prophetically speaking, that is what we see in the book of Revelation. The political power always hand to hand with the religious power.
I was in Chicago years ago, and I was canvassing as a colporteur selling Bible readings from Home Circle. And we come to one great big mansion where the folks were rich in that area and cars all around it and so forth. But I went up the door and I was pretty sure this fellow was a Catholic, so I gave him a Catholic canvas. And he invited me in, and then as soon as he got in, he turned the key in the door, and I said, wait a minute, what am I getting into? He opened another door into a great big mammoth parlor and a great big mammoth dining room with double doors in between, and all seated around the whole business was prelates, some from Europe and all the big ones from America. They were planning the Eucharistic Congress in Chicago. That was way back in the 1920s. And when they started talking to me, they tried to get me to be one of them and offered me every kind of a conceivable opportunity that you could think of. They offered me everything, money, scholarship, and the whole works, and told me the advantage of being Catholic and what they were planning on doing in America and with America. They said, we're going to take over America, and we've already got it fixed, so know how in the world can they escape becoming under our authority, and where we'll be in the jurisdiction and take over. I said, well, how are you going to take over the South? It's predominantly Protestant. I said, we're going to seed the South with Catholic families, and then when they marry into the Protestants, their children will be raised Catholic, and before long we'll have a quarter, then we'll have a third, then we'll have over half, and when we get over half, we've got America. That's one way of doing it. But it says that we've got other ways too. Well, I said, supposing all this was known, and the people, Protestants, knew this, he said, if they knew what we were planning on doing, there'd be bloodshed in 24 hours, and lots of it in 48. I said, are you prepared to take over in case that happens? He said, yes, we have our standing armies. We have everything all prepared with guns, ammunition, and the whole works. And said, we can take over, and you might as well join us and be with us and get in on the right side of the fence. I said to him, I said, listen, there is nothing you can do to invigorate me to become a Catholic. I mean, nothing. I says, I know my horse is going through to eternity, and I'm riding on it. And I know your horses aren't, and I know that you'll be non-plus entities when I'll be enjoying eternity and having a good time forever. And I'm going to see to it that I'm on the right side of the fence. And I know which side I'm on now. And I said, you might as well open the door and let me out, because I know that other people know that I'm in here, and there'll be investigation made if you don't let me out. One of the big fellows with a red cardinal hat got up and said, sir, he says, we're going to let you out. But we want you to know one thing, that everybody that's born in the United States that's not born a Catholic is on a card. You're put on a white card to begin with and kept on a white card until we feel like that we need to watch you. After that, we put you on a blue card and said after you're on a blue card for a while, if we feel like it, we just assume you wasn't existing, you're on a red card. Son, from now on, you'll be on the red card as long as you live. And I know they know me where I'm living and have followed me all around throughout life. They're still doing it. And, well, I could tell you a lot of stories, but that's just one.
Yes, it was in 1967 when a friend of mine came to me very excitedly. He told me that he was doing some call porter work in Indiana, and while knocking on different doors to gain entrance, he was invited into a home very quickly, and he wondered how come he didn't have to use his door openers. When he went in, the fellow who had invited him into his home said, "I know who you people are." And he said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, let me show you something here." And he moved aside a rug from his flooring there, and under that rug was a door. He lifted up the door, and here were stairs that went down into a basement. And he said, "I would like to show you something." So they went down into the basement, and this individual whose home he was in showed him just many files. And as he was looking at these files, he wondered what it meant. He says, "Well," he says, "we know who you are, and I would like to ask you a question. Name me a name of somebody who belongs to your church." And so he said, okay. He named him a name, one of his girlfriends. And this man went to a file, picked out that name, and said this person was baptized on such and such a date, a member of such and such a church, etc. And my friends said his eyes got very large, and he says, "Well, what does this mean? How come you have this information here?" This fellow said, "Well, I belong to the Catholic Church. I belong to a special order, and we have all of you on files in different parts of the country. This is the file that we have on your members of your church here. We know who you are, and we have more complete records on you than I believe you people have for yourself." He said, "I just wanted you to see that so you would know that we know who you are." Well, my friend left that home. He didn't sell any books, but I think he became a more serious thinking individual after that.
Because I was always able to open up to anybody that I cared anything about, even a friend, much less your husband. And he was this way all the time I was married to him. Very evasive.
Was he gone for long periods then?
Yes, he was. He was gone for 3 and 4 months, sometimes out of the year, sometimes a less amount of time, but always no less than 6 weeks at a time. And he would act so bitter when he left. He'd get me all upset to where I'd tell him, why don't you leave, Joe? And so he'd act so sad, but he'd leave. And I saw later that he really intended it to be this way.
He was manipulating you.
Right, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Did he show any remorse?
Not really. No, it was just as though that was his line of work. Very dear neighbors that lived across the street from me. And they knew my husband, and they had known us for years. And so when Joe and I were married, and he would try to communicate with them, but I don't know if he was revealing anything to them that he wasn't saying to me. But these folks told me, they were first to tell me that Joe, in fact, was a priest. Many of my friends questioned Joe in their own minds, not to his face, but they thought he was a very strange person. They thought it was strange that he'd have so many absences from our marriage. But of course I took all the blame for that, not fully realizing that he was irritating me to the point of sending him away these times when it was necessary, in fact, that he was away. Because his church, I'm sure he had the calling that he had to answer, or the work that he had to do for his church.
At what point were you sure that you had married somebody pretty high up in the Roman Catholic Church?
When he had finally convinced me that it'd be wise for us to marry in his church. And I had belonged to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, or I guess I hadn't yet been baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but I felt that it probably would be smart to marry him in the Catholic Church. And so I went ahead, and then we went over to see a priest in Reno and was going to discuss being married. We had to go over to another office, another group of offices, and see a cardinal. And so when we went to discuss our marriage with the cardinal, Joe was rather talking down to the cardinal, and I felt this was sort of unusual, because realizing, just common knowledge, that people didn't talk down to a cardinal if they were Catholics. And I thought that to be a bit strange, and the cardinal took Joe. The two of them walked away, supposedly out of range of my hearing. And that's when I realized that he, in fact, was a Catholic priest. And he had told me that he was going to, what was that word I wanted to use?
Excommunicate?
He wanted to excommunicate himself. And I thought, this is strange, a man that devoted to church wants to excommunicate himself. And then when I heard the discussion about the priesthood, I threw up the papers and I said, I've had it. I'm going to quit. This is it. I'm not going to be married.
When you heard what discussion about the priesthood?
Well, I could hear little bits about your position and this position and that position. It was just very scanty, but I knew that it was, at this time, discussing his priesthood.
How long had you been actually married to him at this time? About?
Oh, 6 years, I guess. I threw the papers up, yes. What I have here I gathered up. I noticed that even my divorce papers are gone, but I don't know what's happened to those. But you did see the papers, the wedding certificate that I have, and I don't know what happened to the divorce certificate.
Did you take any pictures of Joe?
Well, there were lots of pictures made, yes. We had many made.
And then what happened to them?
They were taken. I don't know where they went, but I don't have any pictures left of him at all now.
Did he take them?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so, but who knows?
But you don't have any pictures of Joe today?
No, none whatsoever.
You'd mentioned that someone had broken into to your house and stole them?
Yeah, some of the things were taken from me, stolen from me, yes.
Who would want pictures?
There must have been something else packed in that box. I'm sure there was. Or, who knows? It's a crazy thing. There were quite a few things missing. Even personal pictures of my children, and grandchildren.
Now, he made a boast one day about Hitler. What exactly did he say about Hitler?
He said Hitler was one of our very good people. Hitler and Mussolini, he said, were good Catholics. And he said also the mafia. He said we have some good people in our church. When I showed him the book that I had gotten, written by Samuel Bakioki, he said, that's one of our men. And so he said, notice where it was published. And he turned right away to the area in the front of the book where it tells you published in Rome. And he pointed that out very carefully to me.
Are you telling me that in the same breath that he mentioned Hitler and Mussolini, that he mentioned Samuel Bakioki?
I'm not sure of that. I'm really not sure of that. I don't know that that was at the same time.
How did you feel when he said that? Did you think he was kidding you?
Yeah. I thought he was jesting a lot of the times, and I would question him about it. And he really wasn't jesting at all, but you had the feeling that he was. Joe was a very sober person, and it was difficult to know when he was joking, which was seldom. He was very serious. He had a serious mission within him that he carried out.
I was reared in Pasadena in Southern California, which is only a few miles from Glendale, where Merle Vance used to speak on Sabbath afternoons in his discussions of the Catholic Church with the number 666 and how paganism had worked into the church. It was intensely interesting. Even I've used some of the things he has said even yet today. But he had these mimeograph sheets that he used to pass out that had the pictures that he had copied from his various publications. I know he did a lot of study when he went back to the seminary. He was studying on the connection between 666 and the Roman Church. And when he went to the seminary, some of the people there said, well, now we think we know that there's a Jesuit on the staff here, and we think we know who it is. Merle hadn't been there very long until he said, I think I knew who it was too. Well, he continued his study, and he had pictures from the books that were printed in Rome by the church. And this is what was on these mimeograph sheets that he used to pass out. But at the height of his study, he took some of this amazing material which he had and took it to one of the leaders there in Washington and showed him what they had. This man, without even looking at the paper that Merle had, said, Brother Vance, that study is not for you. But he said, look what I've got. It's all here. It's proved. Here's the pictures. Here's the proof of it. There's no question. He said, Brother Vance, that material and that subject is not for you. Well, he was pretty downhearted. He went to his major professor, which was a professor of history, and he showed him what he had. And this professor said, we want you to write your term paper on that. Well, he said, I'm sorry, but I've already talked with this leader, and he gave his name, and he says that I must not study this any further. So I don't dare write a term paper on it. Well, time went on, and some of his friends said if he didn't change his topic, he would never graduate. In fact, the major professor said that. So he did change his topic to something inconsequential. Finally, the time came for Merle's graduation from the seminary, and it just happened that this leader had been called to Europe for a year, and it was during that year that Merle was graduated. So he had his papers. Following that, this leader died, and a very close friend of this leader was talking with Merle one day, and he said, I know positively that that leader, that man was a Jesuit, because I was a very close friend of him, and I know this positively. Merle was certainly a good student. I remember him when I heard a tape of him recently. I recognized his voice. It was so thrilling to hear his voice again because I enjoyed those messages which he gave. He was a good student, a fine man, a real scholar. Certainly he was a credit to this people.
The subject of Jesuit infiltration into Protestant churches, whenever that subject is brought up, it's often ignored, dismissed, or just brushed aside. For some reason, they don't like to think of this fact. But the story I'm about to tell you occurred in 1939 at a Seventh-day Adventist institution, Washington Missionary College, located in Tacoma Park, Maryland. This was told to me by Dr. B.G. Wilkinson, who was president of the college from 1935 to 1945. Now, Dr. Wilkinson told me that he uncovered a Jesuit infiltrator at that time, in 1939. And this is how it happened. There had been a new Bible instructor hired by the board, and this man had been teaching Bible to the undergraduate theological majors for about 5 months. Now, Dr. Wilkinson had always encouraged an open-door policy, and he encouraged the confidences of his students, especially his theological students. Now, some of these young men came to him after a period of about 4 or 5 months, and they said, Dr. Wilkinson, you teach Bible differently than this new Bible instructor does. There's some things about him that we don't understand. He brings up doubts in the classroom, doubts about our theological position, about our doctrines. These doubts are then not resolved. They're left sort of hanging in the air. And they had other questions, which Dr. Wilkinson couldn't answer. It aroused Dr. Wilkinson's suspicions about this man. Now, the teachers had in Old Columbia Hall little pigeonholes, boxes where their mail slots, you know. They used to put their mail in these little pigeonholes, and the faculty would come and pick up their letters. This one day, Wilkinson saw an envelope being placed by the mailman in the mail slot for this Bible teacher. And the letter was a rather long, rectangular, official-looking letter. And after the mailman left, Dr. Wilkinson stepped over to the box and he drew the letter out. And he looked at it, and the return address was a Hereford Road address. Now, Wilkinson knew that that was a Jesuit college. It wasn't located too far from Washington Missionary College. He took the letter and he steamed it open. Of course, this was an illegal act. But, you know, when you're dealing with a class like they are, they committed many illegal acts in their time. The assassination of princes being the least of their illegal acts. And you know, the Jesuit motto is the end justifies the means. Wilkinson thought, I'm going to steam this letter open. And if it's an innocent thing, I'll just close it up again, say nothing. He steamed it open, and inside he found orders from this young man's superior, telling the young man, outlining to him what he was to preach or teach in his Bible class for the next several months. Dr. Wilkinson reinserted the letter, gummed the flap back on. He called the young teacher in. He said to this young man, he had the letter on his desk, you know, and he said to this young man, I have a piece of mail for you. And he handed it to him. And he says, we know who you are, and we know why you are here. You are a Jesuit, are you not? The young man looked across the desk at Dr. Wilkinson. He picked up his mail, turned on his heel, and walked out. And that was the last they ever saw of this man. He never even stopped to pick up his pay. But he cleared off of that campus the very same hour.
When I was in detective work in Washington, D.C. during World War II, I was going home to Alexandria, Virginia from Washington, D.C., and when I got to the mall, there was two scholars, and they were sticking up their fingers for a ride. I said, I'll just pick them up and put them in the back seat and see what I can find out from them. And so when they got in the back seat and was seated, I asked them, I said, you boys are from Georgetown University taking the priesthood, aren't you? No, we're not taking the priesthood, they said. Oh, I said, you're scholars from Georgetown University taking something. What are you taking? They said, we're Anglican brothers. Oh, I said, the church has never told us what Anglican brothers are, nor much about them, and I don't know much about them. What do the Anglican brothers do, and what are they for? They said, well, we're taking studies to work with the Protestant churches and get them to come in to do what the church wants them to do, and to work with them and work with us. And I said, well, how many of you folks are taking the course? They said, well, about 780. And I said, how many graduates? Oh, some are between 780 and 700 and 800. No, 700 and 780. I said, now, how many graduated last year? And they told me. And then I said, the year before that. And they told me, and I went back to, we had about 3,800 people graduated out in the field. And I said, well, what do you boys do when you go out in the field? No, I said, first I want to know how many graduate next year. Well, it said it would be somewhere under 900 anyway. And I said, how about, what do you do when you graduate? He said, well, the first thing we change our names. And when we change our names, then we're allocated so many to this church, so many to that church, and to another church. And I said, when you go out to the churches, then what do you do? He said, well, the first thing we do is look around for some nice young lady that we'd like to make an associate member with, and then we marry them. And after we're married, we go off to a Protestant theological seminary or school, and we come out a Protestant minister. Then we're taught to, in our course, to work up to the heads as fast as we can in that line, where we're supposed to work in. And I said, now, do all of you work in the same field? No, says some of us work, but we all work in the church trying to get the churches to unite with us and do what we want them to do.
So were these Roman Catholic students then?
They were, as far as I learned, what I learned, they were Jesuits. I know they don't only infiltrate the Protestant churches, but they infiltrate their schools. And I know one fellow that got to be teacher in the Methodist school, and as a result of that, a lot of the Methodist ministers today are carrying communist cards. They utilize anything and everybody to bring their means to an end.
My story goes back a few years ago. When my father first got into ministry, Pastor Arrabito. He was sent by the General Conference to Reno, Nevada, which was his first ministry among the Italian-speaking people. At that time, there were quite a few that had migrated from the east to the west, and especially in the Reno area. So a call went out for a young minister, and my dad was ready and willing and consecrated to do his part in the ministry. He was a young minister at that time. And he was sent to Reno, Nevada. And from there, he was sent to, a call came through not long after that, after there was 40 to 50 members. A call came through to go to San Francisco. And of course, a minister has to always be willing to whether he wanted to or not, to go where he was called. And the call came through, and he did. He went to San Francisco to open up the work there among the Italian-speaking people. Of course, at that time, we never had any thought of who the Jesuits were and what they were about to do and what they were doing, even at that time, and that was some time ago. Anyway, after he was there a while, he got a call to go to Oakland to work among the Italian-speaking people. And he was told that he would be working side by side with a man by the name of Calderoni, Elder Rosario Calderoni, who would be in charge of the Italian work in that area. So my dad went and took orders from Elder Calderoni. He worked in Oakland and El Cerrito and Richmond for a while, bringing people to church and working with them, giving Bible studies, and many souls were baptized at that time due to the work which was promoted in that area. At that time, he became friendly with Elder Calderoni, and in one instance, Elder Calderoni admitted that he was raised and sent to school, to the Roman Catholic school back in Italy, and he was going to be a Jesuit. He was an admitted Jesuit at that time. And he said he broke away from the Jesuits and became an Adventist because he saw that they didn't have the truth. Well, naturally we all believed him. But it wasn't long after that when Dad would answer a call to the Stockton area to raise a little church in the Stockton area, which he went. And of course, all this time, he was under the direction of Elder Rosario Calderoni. And that's when we realized that there was something wrong. Elder Calderoni, at that time, we didn't know it, but was gradually destroying the work that was being done among the Italian-speaking people. The people would come in and complain, and that money was being sent to Calderoni, and wondered what was happening to it, and all the while, why he was visiting people and speaking against the young people, including my dad, that had newly come into truth at that time. Many of the young Italian ministers at that time were being dropped, one by one, for one excuse or another. And we found out it was Calderoni speaking to Elder Houswick, who at that time was in charge of the foreign work. And we were wondering why this was happening. The church was being undermined. We just don't know how it was happening until later, of course, we realized that we felt that it was because of the background, and possibly Elder Calderoni was still in the work the Jesuits pay, or under their direction. It had to be, otherwise the work would have gone ahead, because it went ahead so beautifully before that. Friends, I could only tell you of one incident, but of course I hear of many others. And if one person can get into our work and cause a destruction among the Italian-speaking people, I shudder to think of how many more are doing the same thing today.
That was my father, John Arrabito, who was kept from the ministry by Jesuit influences in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Adventists should wake up. Time is short. What organizations have now been taken over by the Jesuit order and other institutes of Catholicism? What world powers are in her hands to be used in this final chess game for the takeover of the world? We can get some idea when we look back to the Council of Trent in the 1540s through the 1560s. At that time, and during those years, we find vows that were taken by these secret orders to take over the education of the Protestants, take over their schools, take over their churches, especially to destroy the Protestant Bible by creating many translations, destroy the monarchies of Europe, destroy nationalism, to use astronomy and astrology to create new calendars that would eventually transfer the sanctity from Sabbath or Saturday to Sunday. Their goal was to take over the business world, internationalism. They would take over banking, to take over Judaism and the movement of Zionism, to create political strife and chaos and all of these things for one end, that Catholicism should rule. Listen.
I did training in monasteries and convent where I prepare cursigistas, the Legion of Mary, the Blue Army, many of these militant organizations. I train and prepare how they can become Baptists, how they can become Adventists, how they can become Methodists, how they can become Presbyterian, how they can become Pentecostal, and all these areas where they must infiltrate any area.
You bring up one of the other questions I have, might as well ask it now, particularly the Blue Army. Is that in some way connected with the Fatima?
That's correct.
Is
yes.
that to protect it, or
they are the army that creates the greatest promotion of that cult, of that satanic cult here in the United States. In every country, the Roman Catholicism display this promotion to the so-called Virgin. There is not even Mary, the Mary that we know in the Gospel, but a distortion of that really, truly Mary of the Gospel. They display to different militant organizations the promotional need for certain saint or virgin or whatever. And the Blue Army is the greatest promoters of the call to marry here in the United States. The Opus Dei is another arm of the Jesuits. What that means, you have Masons, you have Illuminatis,
okay.
you have the New Age movement, you have the Trilateral Commission, you have the Club of Rome, you have so many others. There are in different areas working through certain programs what they need in that particular area where these organizations move, whether they are secret or public organizations, they need to control certain area of certain people. And this is where and how they'll be ready to have them under control through these organizations. The Opus Dei mainly, they move next to what they call Christian democracy. The so-called Christian democracy is an outgrowth of this Opus Dei. It's exactly the words in Latin precisely define that. The Latin definition is for Opus Dei is the work of God. What that means, the Opus Dei. Opus meaning the work, and then you have how you call Dei, Opus Dei, the work of God.
When the Council of Trent occurred, it was controlled by the Jesuits.
Yes.
How about the Vatican II?
Now,
there a connection?
Yes, the connection is very, very, very prophetical. I will say this, I think that will clear the whole point here, because it's so prophetical that while the Council of Trent was the first council to be managed by the Jesuit order, the Vatican Council was brought about by the same Jesuit order with the same intention. And you know the intention of the Council of Trent. The intention behind the Council of Trent was the Counter-Reformation. What was the intent of the Vatican Council II? Another Counter-Reformation, but called today, how you call it? Renewal. You see the point? Now, the change was a name, but the intentions were the same.
Yes.
See, more sophisticated today.
Yes.
You see, the Counter-Reformation was taken to the Council of Trent. That was the entire Counter-Reformation was performed by the Council of Trent, decrees. Then through that time until today, Vatican Council II came about with the idea of renewal. That means another step forward, and the final, I will say this is the final stage of a Counter-Reformation.
Now, how about the charismatic movement? What's the connection with that?
The charismatic movement is serving the purpose, as we said, of one of the many issues. As we said about Saturdays and Sunday, they'll pick up every issue with different denominations. In the case of the charismatic movement, they pick up the charismatic movement because one factor. They could not bring under subjection the Pentecostal denominations.
They couldn't.
They could not. Even when they went to the ecumenical movement before, from 1945 down to our day, since this already started. As a matter of fact, if you want to know, the World Council of Churches started by financed by the Jesuits in Europe in 1945 after the end of the Second World War already, or by the time that the World War was to end, already the Jesuits were at work trying to unite all the Protestants in Europe. And that was the origin of the World Council of Churches and the ecumenical movement. Today, the charismatic movement is serving that purpose. Where the Pentecostal could not be bring into the ecumenical forum, they brought it through the exercise of charismatic gift.
We were on the way back from London on the jet plane, and there was a man dressed in a uniform like the Catholic priests wear. And he was conducting himself not like a priest you'd see in a movie, very friendly. He was a very sophisticated type man. And people could sense that. And I never thought I'd see him again. But in Baltimore, at the airline station where the baggages come off, well, I turned around and there he was next to me. And I just turned to him and said, "Hello, friend. Are you a Jesuit?" And he says, yes, with a big smile. You see all of his teeth. And he was very happy with himself. I said, well, listen, I'm very interested in the Jesuits. I've read some about them. And what would you think about the Council of Trent and what was invented in the Council of Trent and the infiltration of the Jesuits into Protestantism and the use of the Jesuits through organizations like the Illuminati and the futurism theory, the secret rapture that they invented for the Protestants? And I talked to him about a lot of those things, and he had a metamorphosis take place. His face became rigid, his smile went away, and he looked me right in the eyes and he said, you know quite a bit, don't you? Like he never expected it. And I told him that you know, I was one of the Protestants that got away. And if he could realize that if somebody like me knew those things, just imagine some of the other of God's people that know those things and are willing to tell anybody about them. And it was an amazing situation how that man's face changed. And he thought he was like in one identity, but all of a sudden he realized that these dark secrets of theirs, they're being found out. And I'll never forget that. Would you consider that Jesuitism to be an occult secret society?
It is an occult secret society from the point of view that the Jesuit order, what you know of the Jesuit order and what everybody knows of the Jesuit order is not the truly Jesuit order. What that means is even the Jesuits within the Jesuit order, they all are not knowing the secret society, the inner secret society that they are surrounded by.
Spiritualism and the papacy is as close as two fingers are on your hand.
One cult that started from Fatima, okay, the cult of Fatima, Roman Catholic cult, seems to be antagonistic to the rest of the Roman Catholic Church. It seems that they believe that the Pope that's in now is an Antichrist.
The whole thing is that Satan gets as many people as he can on his side. And by starting something else up, he can get more.
Oh, I see.
And he starts first one thing and then another. That's why he's got so many churches and so many cults and so many this and so many that. What he can't get one person on, he gets them on another. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that he gets most people on is TV. Satan has all kinds of organizations. Mm-hmm. But the Catholic Church is his one biggest, most extensive organization that there is in the world.
Yeah.
He has these others organized to take care of things, but and in some places he works, even destroys himself to make other things work out for himself.
What's the connection between Jesuitism and communism?
Well, that's a long story, but really, communism was really started by the Catholic Church, and the Pope himself is allied with them and a communist himself. They sent some Jesuits into a little town where they wanted to start Catholicism. Now this I learned from E.T. Babienko that worked with me on a lot of detective work that I did. And E.T. Babienko told me that after they had no success for a short while, they substituted the place with twice as many Jesuits as they had in the beginning, and after years they got nowhere. So they said the only way in the big meetings in the Vatican, where the headmen all meet, they said the only way we'll ever get anywhere in putting Catholicism in Russia is to take away the children from the parents and do away with the Greek Orthodox Church by training the children otherwise. And in their brains, this was all formulated, and they decided to put communism into Russia and to put hard-boiled communism, which is Bolshevism, and later bring it on to a de-Christianized Christian Bolshevism.
So the connection between Zionistic Judaism and communism then is, would you say that's a fraudulent story?
Yes, to some extent, and yet they use the Jews wherever they can.
So the Roman Catholic Church utilizes Judaism.
They utilize anything and everybody to bring their means to an end.
So these writers that point to the international Jewish conspiracy, drawing from historical material that appears to see the Jewish involvement in all this, may very well be part of the Catholic ploy to take the heat off of themselves?
Yes, and that's absolutely the truth. And have you ever heard tell of this book that the Zionism taken over?
Code of Calls. Of Zion.
Yes. I have one of the books. They're hard to get. I can get them if necessary for anybody. But I have ways and means of getting them, but it takes me a little while to get them. And when you get them, you better keep them to yourself. But here's the thing. When the Zionists got all that underneath, the Catholics got a hold of some of this material in these books. And now, why do you think that Hitler did away with all the Jews for? Is to get rid of the heads and the ones that would promote this Zionism. And they're doing what the Zionists proposed to do.
So they actually, in reality then, there is a Zionist movement, but the Roman Church is trying to take over it and control it
Yeah,
for their own purposes.
They have a club of 300 at Rome that does nothing but figure out how they can do it and why they can do it and where they can do it and why they can go ahead. The war in Vietnam was nothing more than just using the United States to put in Catholicism into Vietnam.
What do you know about the organization of the Knights of Columbus?
I know too much,
Too much.
and too much to tell.
Oh, I see.
But I know one thing, and that is that they're a strong organization in the United States, and they have a lot to do with this here Mustachia Army.
The Ustachis.
Yes. When I
Are
was,
the Knights of Columbus also organized in other countries?
you bet your life
Or were
they
they
are.
financing the Ustachis of Serbia?
Wherever there is in other countries, they're organized. Wherever the Catholics are in force, they're organized.
Well, is the Knights of Columbus an extension of the Jesuit order,
Well,
but into secular
they
society?
all work and with together. They're dovetailed.
Do you know anything about the connection between Roman Catholicism and Masonry?
They're tied in together.
Would you say Roman Catholicism actually manipulates and controls Masonry?
They've got to the place where they're in control of a lot of things, and they have a lot to do with Masonry. You know, one of the heads of Masonry, at the head of things, is a Catholic.
One night he told you that they run our church. Tell us about that.
His people run our church, he
Who
said.
were his people?
The Catholic Church. The Catholic Church run all churches.
He said that to you?
Yes, yes.
And specifically that the Catholic Church runs the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
Well, very much like that. I don't recall exactly the way it was worded. This is the impression that I got from what he had said, the statement that he had made. We. He always whenever he said we, that was the church and he. He always included himself as the church.
From Jeannie's testimony about her marriage to a Catholic priest agent, we get a sense of the tremendous confidence that the Roman Catholic Church has now in her position of dominating the nations and its institutions. Very soon we're going to be locked into a period of terrible persecution, and there'll be many martyrs among the faithful Christians. Listen to the words of Revelation 17, verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. She is uniting with the rulers of the world. Listen, in verse 12, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Rulers in this world will give their political power to a system, a political system that will be dominated by the papacy. And that system is going to make war upon God and his followers. In Revelation 18, part of our last message to the world is to tell the world, all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornications, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. That the governments of the world are in an unholy alliance with the Roman papacy, and God is going to judge them. I want you to listen very carefully to Dr. Hiram Duke's testimony as he shares their position in world politics.
When I was behind these locked doors, they told me that they were going to cede the South. And with what they told me then, I knew they were planning World War II. And I knew they were planning on bringing all the DPs and ceding the South with DPs. They've done it. They've got to the place now where...
DP is... What's a DP?
That's the folks who are displaced in the old country on account of war.
Well, one thing that's interesting is no bombs are dropped on the Vatican.
Well, my wife was the head stenographer in the Vatican, in the Pentagon at that time. And she gave all the orders and sent out all the orders to the big men. And she had orders to see that there was no Protestant flew over the Vatican and over Rome, because they were afraid that they might, through their own ingenuity, want to drop a bomb there. Are you aware that the head immigration authority in Germany was a strong Catholic, and that he let the men in that were trained in New York for the hoodlums that went over to do away with the Tsar and his outfit, and they were shipped by him into Moscow by getting one of their men into Moscow and shipped in boxcars, and this fellow in Moscow that got in there ahead went and opened the padlocks off of boxcars and let them out, and they went right up and did away with
about Lenin and Trotsky.
Yes, sir.
Trotsky was trained in New York, wasn't he?
Yeah.
The head of a bunch of hoodlums.
Got to talking with E.T. Babienko about a lot of things. And we got in places where we wanted to know things. And we put on priest garb, dressed up like a priest, and he put on even garbs on beyond the priesthood. Well, because he spoke in 44 languages more fluent than I do in English, and his wife speaks 33 languages fluent. Why, and he understands enough in other languages right away quick, and he picks them up like magic. The General Conference used him for interpreter to go between a lot of these places wherever they needed him. And he went to Europe and went to Asia and a lot of these different things. And when he went to Asia, he was over in the Himalaya mountains, where it's so difficult to learn a language. He learned some things was going on in Europe, and he wanted to go over and find it out. So he took an airplane, he flew over there, and he dressed up like a big head man in the Catholic Church. And he went in among these other men, and he purported that he couldn't understand their language. They had to get him an interpreter. So they got him an interpreter, and he understood their language better than they did. And he understood everything they were saying and everything they were saying about him. And that way, why, he fooled them to where they thought he was a high dignitary, and he went in and found out things that he wouldn't otherwise. When he found out when he went to Europe that they were planning on getting rid of the Greek Orthodox Catholic Church. And one reason they tried with the Illuminati tried to put a bank in Russia, and they couldn't get the bank in Russia because the fact that the Tsar was too smart for them. And so they said, well, the only thing we can do is do away with the Tsar. And
What years was this?
well, this was way back in the time of before the World War I.